Hey guys, I'm very, very grateful to finally kind of meet this guy, someone that I've been wanting to meet for a long time. And I don't want to kind of botch your surname, so I want you to say your surname before I continue my introduction. So this guy is a functional wizard, but I'd like you to say your name first.
Yeah, Salemi is my last name.
Okay,
Kind
so,
of like salami, but with just like my nickname growing up was always Salami Mike, but
right.
Mike Salemi is the way the way it's pronounced.
So for some of you guys that have watched my videos on YouTube and podcasts and stuff, you see me interview different people, but I've never really gotten a chance to really interview somebody who's an elite level athlete in the true sense of the word. So just to kind of inform everybody at the start of this kind of talk, kind of can you kind of walk us through your life, how you got into fitness? Yeah, initially start with how you kind of got into fitness in the first place.
Certainly. I mean, for as long as I can remember, I've always been an athlete. I think, it started with my brother. My brother was a gymnast since he was probably 4 or 5 years old. And then I got into gymnastics when I was about 7. And I would say across my whole journey as an athlete via different sports, I've always been so blessed to have amazing coaches. And when I started in gymnastics, in the early years, like my coach was a guy named Krasimir Dunev. And Krasimir was a Bulgarian Olympian. He competed in for sure in Barcelona and in Atlanta. And in Atlanta, he was the first person ever to do 6 release moves on the high bar consecutively at that time.
Wow.
And I remember he grew up in the kind of the Soviet system, and from a young age, he was our coach. Pretty much, he stayed here after the Atlanta Games. Just all us kids in the gym always wanted to be like him, and so he was pretty much eating. He wasn't taking any supplements at the time. He was pretty much eating whole foods, and I just had the picture of like who I wanted to be growing up, and that's really what started kind of like my interest in physical health and physical fitness.
Mm.
And after that, I had gotten injured. It's interesting. Like we were briefly talking before the call about the pain teacher. We kind of
Yeah,
just
yeah.
touched on that. But that's the pain teacher shown up at so many times during my life, and have kind of been points of transition. And when I was 15 years old, I pretty much did gymnastics till right in the early years of high school in America. And I had injured my lower back, and a chiropractor who helped rehabilitate me, told me, he goes, let's get you healthy. And, I think you're pretty darn strong. I'm also a competitive power lifter. And this guy's name was Mike Ludovico. He was at the time the drug-free, in one of the organizations, one of the main organizations, the drug-free bench press champion of the world.
Mm-mm.
Stocky guy, just an incredible, just phenom of an athlete in that sport. And when I went to the gym and competed around, we were a very, very tight knit, small powerlifting team. There was probably like 16 to 18 of us who all had a key to the gym, and that's, I would say, really where I grew up. Was like around lifters. It was always a team environment. And one of the lifters there was actually best friends with the owner of a holistic lifestyle center.
Right.
And he goes, man, you're really into this powerlifting stuff. I was pretty much at 15, 16, pretty much programming for the entire gym. We had a few world champions there, and I had always loved studying Louis Simmons' work and really anyone, Poliquin's work. And when I went to, he brought me over to this holistic lifestyle center, and it was an amazing experience because at that age, around 17 or 18, the whole gym, and we're talking 15 plus years ago, was modeled after the Chek principles. And unfortunately, the gym's no longer around, but the owner of the gym, we had Chek practice. We had Johnny Suarez, who I believe
Yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah,
familiar.
yeah.
He was the guy who really, he's been. We can talk. I'd love to talk about Johnny later, how instrumental he's been
Mm.
for me. But Johnny, I met him there. I met Stephanie, one of our mutual friends there. I was exposed at such a young age to hypnotherapists, very, very just amazing chiropractors, great personal trainers, assessments, nutrition and lifestyle coaching. And so I started becoming a personal trainer at, it was called Optimal Fitness Center, or Optimal Fitness and Lifestyle Center. And I started becoming a strength and conditioning coach there. And in exchange for essentially powerlifting lessons to the owner of the gym, Brian, he really kind of brought me under his wing and kind of started teaching me about, he gave me Paul's book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. And that's really where I would say I got kind of my start in terms of being exposed to at least the kind of more holistic realms of training. And then from powerlifting, I won the world championships in powerlifting when I was 19. Then transitioned in college to Olympic weightlifting and had just an amazing coach there, Jim Schmitz, who was our 3-time Olympic U.S. coach. And then got into kettlebells, which I'm sure we'll talk about there, and was fortunate enough to train in Russia with the national team there. And now I'm just trying to, just learn as much as I can. The main population of people that I'm working with are mixed martial arts, jiu-jitsu practitioners, taekwondo athletes. So that's kind of like a very abbreviated version of the developmental stages of kind of what's gotten me here right now.
So at what age did you get to the point where you were starting? Because you mentioned Paul's book and at 19 being a powerlifting champion and stuff, world champ, which, I mean, you kind of just said those like, went to school at 19, really basic, like, I went to school at 19, but you're like, I'm the world champion at 19. That's like, stop for a second, hold on, you became the world champion in powerlifting at 19? That is incredible. It's like, one of the really interesting things about all this sort of stuff is, especially for me, meeting people like yourself that are, in the top 1% of the world at what you do, you always have had to go through an intense learning. Something that someone taught me, a saying that someone taught me years ago, when someone comes up to you and says, how can you possibly be that good or know that much? And he said, the answer to that is always, I've taken a long walk and a very short path. You condense so much information in such a short period of time. And it's always interesting that the people that are so skilled like yourself have immersed themselves in so many things. I mean, I was just writing down all these things. I went to Russia, trained with the Russian team, world champ, powerlifting at 15, hypnotherapist, gymnastics. It's so much stuff in such a short period of time. And you're relatively, you're still young, like what, you're like 32, something like that?
31, yeah, you nailed it.
So, I mean, you've done so much in such a short period of time, and that's where, you start to see and realize that certain people are masters because, as we know, there are people that are very good at one thing, and that one skill is what they kind of hide behind, and whenever they're pushed into something else that they're uncomfortable with, they don't want to be exposed by their flaws, whereas we want to embrace our flaws and say, what can I do to make me better, whatever it is, whether it's breathing, or if it's Tai Chi, or if it's hypnotherapy, what is it that can make us better so we strengthen our weaknesses to become, our strengths. And I just find this stuff fascinating that you've gone through so much in such a short period of time, which is so, one of the reasons why I was kind of pumped to kind of talk with you. Like I said at the start, I speak to a lot of people that are very good nutritionally or very good theory-based people, but not somebody who is actually such a high elite athlete, because I wanted to get your perspective from somebody who actually does work at this high level, which is why I'm kind of excited to kind of go for this interview with you. And just I want to say to my listeners, I've seen a lot of Paul's work with you, and I've been fascinated by the kind of stuff that he's been taking you through over years. We'll get to that in a few minutes, but just going back a little bit, I wanted to kind of touch on, so I know we've kind of touched on Paul a little bit. What kind of led you to want to work with Paul? I know it was related to an injury or something while you were lifting. Can you share that for a little while?
Sure. So when I started competing, it's been almost, give or take, 9 years that I've been a competitive kettlebell sport lifter. And in kettlebell sport, there's different rankings, just like any other sport, let's say. And one of the highest ranks is called Master of Sport, and it's designated by a specific number of repetitions based off of the kettlebell weight you use and your weight class. And I had been trying for almost, give or take, 4 years, had always come very close to, maybe 3.5 years, getting very, very close to this level of Master of Sport, but always falling short, because it wasn't even in just competition, but at any difficult effort in the gym and training, which of course you have to go through if you want to win, you want to be a champion. I essentially, my left forearm would completely swell, fill with blood, be an extremely painful sensation. I'd have to drop the bells. Right. So within, 3, 4, 5 repetitions, I would get close, and it was such an emotional roller coaster for so many years that, I went through almost 9 to 10 different practitioners, and I always tell people, like, they were all great people. I tried to see the very best people that I could get my hands on or travel to. You name it. craniosacral therapists, rolfers, acupuncturists, just anyone who could possibly help. And in every single practitioner, like I really do believe, and this doesn't just, for me at least, doesn't just apply to like the self-healing modalities, but whatever it is that we do, we have to give it our full energy and our full effort to determine if it's something that's really working or not. So for the rolfer, like I worked with him 3 months consistently, did 10 sessions plus, and I didn't want to do any other therapy during that time because I wanted to see would this one modality, would this one healing tool be the one thing that would, solve the problem.
Yeah.
So that's also why it took so long, but also why I appreciate my work with Paul that much more, because not only did I try one session of acupuncture, no, I tried, months of just acupuncture, months of cranial sacral. No, cranial sacral was a little less, but at least 5 sessions. And, no one could figure out exactly what it was. Learned a lot about myself. It was an amazing experience. But I got to the point where I had signed up for HLC2. And, at the end of HLC2, we have our chi sticks that we sign as Chek practitioners, being commitment to meditation, as you know, to Paul. And it was the only opportunity that I could get. I mean, the class was packed. I think we had maybe give or take 40 to 50 easily people from around the world. Everyone wants a piece of Paul, right?
Yeah,
it's the celebrity in the room. And I didn't want to be that guy that was just, can you fix me? I just, I didn't want to be that guy, but I just come off a competition where at the end of the competition, I remember just being in my hotel room and just crying and just being like, it had happened on so many competitions that I was just like, I don't know what to do. The docs had said either, well, one, they wanted to do surgery because what it ended up being was mainly, although it was derived from a few other things, it was a compartment syndrome in my arm. And so essentially what they wanted to do was cut the fascia and release the pressure. And I was like, man, I just knew that surgery was not, like, I just didn't want to go that route. I wanted to exhaust every means, every measure before. Or they said, stop the sport that you love. Or they just stop. And I said, well, sorry, I don't really accept both. I don't accept either. And at the end of HLC2, I got in line and Paul was signing my stick. And I said, I know this isn't the appropriate place to do this, but do you have 2 seconds? This is what's going on. This is where I'm struggling. I would love to make an appointment with you or just have you take a look at what's going on. And in just a matter of just literally maybe a minute, I don't know, just standing in line, he felt my forearm, palpated, asked me a few questions, and he goes, I'm not positive. I have to get you on my table. I can't promise you anything, but I do believe I know what's going on. Try and make an appointment with Vidya. And so I contacted Vidya, and it almost took me 3 months to get in with him. He's obviously super busy, and then they were moving the institute at that time.
Right.
But from my first session, like within honestly just a few minutes of him feeling, and then him seeing me lift because he wanted me to bring kettlebells down and observe me perform my movements, he was like, I think I got it. I'm pretty sure I got it. And to be honest, as much as I respected Paul at that time and still do now, of course, I was a little skeptical because, when you get injured and you see so many people for so many years and every single person is like looking at you like my way is the way, like, oh, I can fix you, I can heal you, the Rolf and all these people, and they're great people, nothing against them. But when you hear that so many times, like, you invest a lot into it. And I got to the point where I was just like, okay, I'm hoping for the best. But Paul's approach, because it includes so many different modalities and so many different techniques and so many different perspectives, like what I found was, the rolfer was just looking at me through the lens, through the goggle of the rolfer. The upper cervical chiropractor, amazing dude, amazing technique, was looking at me. Everything that was going on in my body was through that lens. The cranial sacral. And Paul was the first person that was essentially treating me like a whole person and not necessarily promising me anything until he got me down there. And he still said, I still can't promise you. We have to work. And he goes, I have to, I have to learn about you. I've got to study you. It's going to take me some time. And still, he didn't promise me anything, but he says, I've got a pretty good idea. And, he was right. And so it was a compartment syndrome. And, if you fast forward, I pretty much worked one-on-one with Paul as not only like my corrective coach, but my nutrition and lifestyle coach, my kettlebell coach, my just overall coach for 2.5 years, where I would fly down once a month to work with him for usually one full day.
Right.
Until the point we both felt I got to a place where I was ready to kind of spread my wings and kind of still use him, of course, as a consultant, and I still do, but really kind of take off and take off myself.
Fascinating. And just one thing on that, one thing I'm really interested in is, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you mentioned about your technique. I think I've read it in one of Paul's blogs that your lifting technique had to be modified in some way. Your lifting technique itself.
Sure. Yep.
So just give me an example of like one exercise that, like, I don't know, maybe a snatch, that how would he have modified it for you? Is it looking at your technique and basing it on your physiology, or was it just the lifting technique itself in general that didn't work for anybody, or was it specific to your body?
That's a great question. So, when I first came to Paul, I was using more of a classic kettlebell sport technique. And there's a few, every single sport's going to have their own compensations, and especially their own compensation strategies to reach a high level of success. And kettlebell sport, for maybe if people listening in aren't familiar with it, it's a pretty challenging sport. We have, there's a few different events, but the main event that I compete in and really excel at is the clean and jerk. And so we have 2 kettlebells. Now I compete at a few different weights, but the main professional level is 2 32-kilo kettlebells, so 1 in each arm. You repeat a clean and jerk where you swing the bell through the legs, clean it to the chest, and then jerk overhead. And you repeat that motion as many times as possible, with some judges making sure they're legal and technical reps, in 10 minutes. You can't rest. The bells can't stay by your waist side. You can only rest at the chest or overhead, so you really never have a rest.
And I want to kind of pause for a second here, because you're giving this, the listeners a kind of viewpoint in this, but I don't think they really know how that is. The only thing I can kind of give people that would make them kind of understand to a very minimal degree of how hard that must be is, imagine you've got a suitcase and the suitcase strap breaks and you could no longer pull it along the floor, and you've got to walk from one end of the terminal all the way to the other end, and it might take you 5 minutes. Imagine you got to pick that sucker up and just hold it for the next 5 minutes in one hand, and in the other hand you got a 2-year-old baby, so you can't put it down, and you got to go from one end of the airport all the way to the other end, and you might think, damn, I want to put this down. This is killing me. Magnify that times 50, and you'll probably understand what the heck Mike's talking about here. That's what it's frustrating, because people probably think, that's not bad. 10 minutes isn't bad, but it's relative. It's relative. 10 minutes doing something hard is hard. So anyway, sorry, continue.
No, I love that. Just made me think of one of my MMA athletes that I work with came to support me in a large competition maybe like a year ago. And usually where we warm up and where we compete, the platforms are not super close. It might be in the back of a gym or in another like building next door. And so we all help each other out. So he asked me, he goes, oh, you want me to carry your bells up to the platform for you? Which we usually do as friends and stuff like that to help us out so we don't waste any energy. And I go, sure. And this is a Bellator 10-2 fighter,
Wow.
just a beast, Adam Piccolotti. And he was just carrying them, and he just gave, at that time I was competing in that one at double 40-kilo bells. And so he's just like, after he saw me, he's like, man, I got so much more respect for you than I've felt. So it's definitely heavyweight, and yeah, so it certainly is a ball buster for sure.
So you were saying with the clean and jerk, so what, Paul modified your technique specifically for you?
So what we had found was one of the things, so there was many things that was contributing to the compartment syndrome. One was I had a really big imbalance between the phasic system and the tonic system. So being a power lifter and just being a fast twitch athlete, and I still would say I am, like my motor is so much bigger, relatively speaking, compared to my stabilizers. So I could go like hell out of the gate, but in order to sustain that for 10 minutes was a very, very big challenge. So what would happen is, especially due to some overtraining as well, I would get 1 to 2 minutes in the set and I would just get so shaky. Like my stabilizers would be fried, and then my prime movers would act as stabilizers, which obviously they're not designed to do. So the first thing that he did, from not including, let's say, the diet and lifestyle stuff or any of the mental emotional stuff, but from just a pure physical perspective, the first thing he did was a full-blown corrective phase to rebuild and to try and balance out my stabilizers. And then even just that, even if I had just done that only and then added into the technique I was already using, I would have noticed, I know, tremendous benefit. Right. But we combined that with, essentially, it was more or less like of an Olympic technique, where it would kind of think of like more Olympic weightlifting, and we weren't using a classic kettlebell sport rack position where we rest the elbows on the iliac crest, which is more of a compensation strategy, pretty much only used like in specific situations for lifting. So he really removed me for almost a year plus from the classic style of kettlebell sport lifting techniques. And I will say, like, I got probably, while I was in that sport, probably the strongest that I'd ever been, and most functionally strong. And so, I was competing with this technique, but what we found is even though my arm pump and my compartment syndrome had pretty much resolved itself for the most part, I was stronger and healthier than I'd ever been, but I still couldn't compete at the world championship level compared to these other guys, because all these other lifters were using these specific strategies that we use in competition. And so Paul came to one competition and observed the lifters there. Yeah, which was, and that was, I think, and I would love to talk about even just like some of the things I've learned as a coach, and just having Paul go to the competition and really just observe the environment gave him a whole new perspective. Even though I was telling him it's just certain things that you just observe, right? So I was healthy again. I pretty much resolved myself of injury. I had a great foundation now. And then from there, we started playing with, okay, what are maybe some strategies we can use to combine both styles? Maybe during a set, we start more orthopedic, more Olympic type style, and then we transition when you're gassed to. So it took me a long time to kind of figure out what has been the right recipe for me. And now where I'm at, because now, like, at least for specifically kettlebell sport only coaching, the main coach that I work with is a guy named Dennis Vasiliev, who is the 8-time world champion. And what's been so neat about him is, I would say, and I've shown Paul, like when I've shown him, when we would sit down and look at videos of some of the Russian lifters and some of the best, Dennis, of all of them, at least maybe there's 2 or 3, but Dennis, in my experience, has the most Olympic style technique of all of them. And so pretty much the style that I'm using now is kind of a combination of a lot of the things I learned from Paul with what I'm doing with Dennis. So there is definitely that kind of rack position, that classic rack position. But if you notice, as opposed to in kettlebell sport, when we use these strategies, we use very exaggerated curvatures. Right. Like we have to go in extreme kyphosis, sway, like these things we have to adapt to. But Dennis uses a much more Olympic style posture, so much more vertical, much more stacking one joint over the other. So I found that to be much less stressful. And then when you combine that with all the recovery modalities and strategies and self-healing things that I learned from Paul, now I'm starting to feel, and I'm still evolving, like I still have so much to learn as an athlete, but I think like what's becoming my style of lifting is just constantly refining. Like the better I get, the better, like even if I were to go back right now to work a full day with Paul, I'm sure I would learn a ton more now, being where I am now, and maybe even what I'm ready to absorb right now as a coach and as a lifter. So I would say it's constantly changing and constantly evolving.
Yeah, I think there's so much to cover with that. I think that man, we've got so much to talk about. Jeez. One of the things I always note, and I'm a massive Bruce Lee fan, and I'm always talking about, when Paul talks about with his vision, he says he has so much depth to his vision. He sees so much more than most people. So, you saying that him coming to environment, it's so important to see little intricacies like the environment, the heat, all that sort of stuff to take into account how you're going to design a program. And with his depth of vision, I remember just talking about what you were saying about learning more as you get more experience. I won't say older because you're so young, but as you get more experienced. I remember Bruce Lee had this saying, I always quote this all the time. And he said, when I started martial arts, this is Bruce Lee now, he said, when I started martial arts, I thought a punch was a punch and a kick was just a kick. As I started to get deeper into martial arts, I realized a punch was more than a punch and a kick was more than a kick. Once I'd mastered the aspect of martial arts, I realized a punch was just a punch and a kick was just a kick. It moved back into beautiful simplicity. It looked complex until it became simple again, and it looked simple when you didn't have the eye. And it's like what you're saying, it's like, it's like your perspective, and it's almost like, as you get older, your perspective increases because of the depth of knowledge of your understanding of doing the lift for thousands and thousands of hours. And then it might just be a slight torque with your finger or your wrist or a breath or a relaxation in your opposite shoulder, and all these things can just change the dynamics of the lift, which is so important for elite performance. And I don't know if you know much about boxing. There's a guy called Bernard Hopkins. Legend, he started boxing at 24 after he left jail, and by that time Mike Tyson was already been a champion 3 years, and this guy was just starting. But he retired at 50, and he broke the world record for the oldest fighter to win a world title. He won his last world title at 48. And he was just talking about how when he was, and this is kind of the thing I kind of want to move on to, relating back to still fitness and training, is one of the things that he said was, he realized in his older years that, he used to just thrash his body and just get through with sheer willpower, which we know a lot, there's talking a lot of, working with a lot of MMA fighters. A lot of these people think it's normal to be injured and just to get through it with willpower, because that's just what comes to the territory. You're always injured, just train through it. And, one of the things that he said was, when he was younger, he used to train like 3 hours per session. And then he said, but I'm training for a 36-minute boxing match. He goes, now that he's older, he's looking back and he's like, I only need to train for 36 minutes. I'm fighting for 36 minutes. Why am I training for longer than that? He goes, I'm in the gym and I laugh at these young guys that are training for 3 hours. I just need to train for 36 minutes. That's how long I'm fighting for. And that's how he got his longevity, because he could look back at it and look at refining things. And Jean-Claude Van Damme, who's another guy that I really like, he said, one of his phrases that he said was smarter not harder, and I adapted that into my system. And it's true. It's like, why am I just just breaking myself down as opposed to finding a smarter way or a better way to do it? And Joe Rogan, he did a podcast recently with Faraz Zahabi, GSP's trainer.
I haven't caught it, but a bunch of my friends have sent me that one. I gotta listen to that.
Yeah, it's really cool. I've only listened to snippets of it, but just tying it into what you're saying, I want to kind of get back to you now. But he was Faraz Zahabi was talking about. I call it cross shit. Oh, my students always laugh. I call it cross shit, not CrossFit. And he was talking about it, and he said, the thing about it, his issue with, I'll just call it CrossFit for a second, but his issue with it is that it's all about 1 rep max every single session, killing yourself, and having no energy at the end. He said there's no way you can be elite as a CrossFitter and at the same time elite as an MMA fighter, because you have to give somewhere. He said you can't be able to work 100% at CrossFit and then work 100% at MMA, because you're just breaking your body down in both fields. He said you have to be able to be using CrossFit kind of as a kind of a rainbow bridge for your MMA, not become elite in both. And you see, look at all these CrossFitters. The reason why they get injured is because they're constantly breaking themselves down, because every exercise or every routine or every training session is 100% max. And you said you can't train like that. You have to oscillate. You have to have rest periods. You have to have, as Paul says, your winter. When he talks about the different stages or phases of our yearly cycle. So let me just pause for a second. So I wanted to I know there's a lot to say. I kind of wanted, let me just...
Warren, you broke up right there, brother.
Yeah,
you were just saying the last point.
Yeah, let me just say that again, because I might have to pause that bit. So, he talks about, this cycle, this, as Paul talks about, this winter and having this oscillation of exercise and rest. So I kind of summarize that into one little thing that I want to throw back to you, because you were talking about, you know, athletes and training. You know, and a lot of times athletes work and they are injured and they think injury is normal, it's part of the territory. And they just use pure willpower to get through their training sessions, even though they may be injured. So, from your point of view, from your experience, you know, is it normal to train injured? And if so, what can you do about that? Is there a better way?
Yeah, what you bring up for me there is, you know, a few things. One, like I see, and this is what really excites me about working with athletes, especially even the MMA ones, because that's the population I really am excited about right now. I see so much untapped potential in these guys because these guys have the willpower, the mindset, the work ethic.
Yeah.
And if you just get them just to go to sleep an hour earlier or to just eat a little bit better food, it's like these guys are amazing, and it's like what they could be could be so much more. And as it relates to injury, I think I do feel like, you know, everyone's journey is different, and I think everything has a purpose, especially in the injuries. And most oftentimes, I think as athletes, we find kind of the light at the end of the tunnel or the other side through injury. Because it's like through every injury, I went on to the next quote unquote greater thing, if you want to call it that. And then I found Paul. Yeah. So it's like my overtraining, my lack of self-management or lack of awareness or whatever, like brought me to Paul. And now I'm able to share, you know, my experience, my knowledge. And I don't think maybe I would have found Paul, but I don't know. I don't know if I would have gone that depth. So I think it all has a purpose, but I would say as like an ongoing thing, one of the things, you know, I just got back from spending 3 weeks in Boise, Idaho. And in Boise is the headquarters of Suple's training system, where Coach Ivanov has like a wrestling school. And one thing that I was so amazed with when I was there was, so Ivan was a former Bulgarian Olympian in Greco-Roman wrestling and was one of the U.S. Olympic coaches.
Right, wow.
And one of the things that I was and I pretty much I was there for almost 3 weeks. They have the national championships this upcoming week, I believe it is. And so I was there for like their hardest of the hard training camp for his wrestlers. Then I was there during his taper week, and then I left. And so I just wanted to go to learn more about all the tools and the training he uses, but also how he structures training for. We had the Olympic gold medalist from Serbia there, world champion from Serbia as well. We had a national team member, so we had some elite level athletes. And just to see, you know, there's so many routes to the top, and everyone kind of has their way. But one of the things that I was really impressed with him in particular, and from the experience, was, you know, his guys don't usually get injured. Like, I was so blown away at the intensity and how they were pushing. But then I also realized, you know, having been around wrestlers and how especially they wrestle like in Russia and Dagestan and stuff like that, their pace, their volume. His is very different. He gets these kids out in a park, out in the fresh air, at least 2 to 3 days a week, get them out of the gym. At least 4 days a week, these kids' warm-ups were games, dodgeball, butt ball. He 20, 30 minutes playtime. He encourages them, much like Paul had with me, get in the pool, wiggle around, move around, you know, use that as recovery. You know, everyone has what, you know, healthy nutrition is to him, but he would at least ask them, you know, did you guys eat breakfast? Did you guys go to sleep? And for him, he would much rather, you know, his guys go into competition with gas in the tank than feeling spent. And so to see his taper week where the volume really dropped, where they focused on more techniques, drilled, still stayed strong, but I was really amazed. And what I saw was, one, how he's made so many champions through that methodology. And then two, honestly, how much love and respect his athletes have for him, because they know he's not just there to crush them.
Right.
And that was one thing I learned. I was like, wow, like these kids will go to war for you. And it's because he's not just, I mean, he's grinding them, but he's, you know, every Saturday is an active recovery day, a stretching day. Sunday's completely off. And he modifies all training based off how they're doing, very much like how Paul coached me in his own way. And so it was just a really interesting observation that I think today, right now, as a coach, one of the themes that I'm really, if I reflect on it, one of the things that I try and do as much as possible is how can we achieve more and more and more by doing less, less, less? And that even relates to even like a specific stretch, for example. It's like, how can we put ourselves in the very best position possible to experience, let's say, a hamstring stretch or whatever it is, without needing to go touching my forehead to my knee when my spine rounds. Like, is the stretch really coming from one of the hamstrings, or is it going into the spine? So as much as possible, neither that way, or selecting foods, or whatever it may be, it's like, how can we make it get the very, very most from the very, very least? And I think that's where I'm seeing through these experiences, working with different coaches, then also kind of coming up with my own style that feels good for me, that I feel a synthesis of what's made sense to me as an athlete and in my own way. That's been a very, very true thing that I've been experiencing for sure.
So with all of what you said, I mean, obviously it's, like we say, when you're, there's so much confusion when you're not in the top 1% in the world, because there's so much opinion that's untried at a true high level. And it always seems to me, when you're truly in the top 1%, everybody's saying the same thing, everybody's doing the same thing. It's everybody else that has the opinion that actually doesn't know, because they they have that saying, those who know don't say, and those who say don't know.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's interesting, because even though it's not the four doctors, it kind of is. It's just not, in the exact appreciated way. Like, may not be doing Tai Chi, but you said they are doing mindfulness, as you said, like active rest. So, do you think, from your point of view, that the reason why they're not getting injured? I mean, you kind of said it, but I kind of wanted to summarize it for the people as well. It's because they're finding me time, downtime, active rest, and that's the kind of key that a lot of these elite performers are lacking. It's not about killing yourself in every session. It's also about, like you said, having reserves and finding downtime to be able to maintain a training camp.
I would certainly agree. That's definitely been my experience, because, as Paul always says, I remember he says you can be a one-hit wonder, but it's like, what really truly matters is, like, can you repeat that year after year after year?
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, don't get me wrong, like, winning an Olympic gold medal, like, that's an incredible achievement, or a world champion, but it's like, if your dream is only to do that once, then great. Yeah. But if you want it, it's a sport that you love, like, especially the martial arts. Like, everyone I know in martial arts loves it. Like, it's a lifestyle, the jiu-jitsu lifestyle, this lifestyle, and they want to do it until their older age. And I don't know if you can, or at least to the level that we would all love to do, if you don't have some form of a four-doctor approach. And also, if you're not open, like Coach Yvonne was very open. He goes, can you give a nutrition talk to these guys? He goes, I can't do it, but I know it's important. And so that was the window that was open, and I absolutely shared with them, my experience, the Chek approach, and what it's done for me. And so, I think the best coaches have their own, methodology around this, but absolutely, without sleep, without, managing our thoughts, without managing our breathing, it's like, it's very hard to compete at a high level for, more than a few years. Very, very hard.
So I kind of want to get back to that in a moment by talking to you about your actual approach with athletes and how you kind of work with them, what key things you actually do with clients that kind of sets you apart from the normal strength and conditioning coach. But just because we inadvertently kind of touched on it in a way when we spoke about the pain teacher, I kind of wanted to tie this in when we talk about injuries, and injury creates self-reflection. And like one of the things that our friend Paul Chek said to me, and it's probably shared with you as well, is when you get to a stage of change, when you have to change, one of two things happen. You either change and grow, or you go further into denial. And you keep doing, or you keep repeating the same thing, but you just have to get better at lying to yourself. Because once you're faced with the truth, like if we're talking about training for a moment, I know so many boxers that have trained in a specific way, and they've gotten beaten, and then all they did was they fired the coach, and then they did the exact same thing and got beaten again, to the point where they had 6 different trainers in a 3-year period. and they looked everywhere except themselves. And that's somebody who's gone further and further into denial, because every single time it happened, they had to justify it in their mind with another lie, which was lying to themselves about something that they weren't doing. Maybe they weren't sleeping on time. Maybe they overestimated or underestimated their opponent. Whatever it was, they never looked at themselves. They never thought that the issue was with them. They always thought it was with the coach. It's something the coach has done wrong. So, when we speak about pain, pain is supposed to bring about some form of, as Paul says, pain is a synthesis for change, or also the synthesis for consciousness, which means you become aware of the pain and try to do something different. And we were talking off air about, this is kind of like a form of a rite of passage for athletes, facing the dilemma that what they're doing just isn't working. Can you just talk about your own experience with, you've touched on it for yourself with pain and, how it kind of brought about changes for you. But can you talk about that for yourself and or athletes in any way where you can explain how pain can kind of bring about a change in your life in general?
Yeah, I think for me at least, the pain has brought, one of the things I feel like, sometimes I've said this saying, like, a strong man is a vulnerable man. Yeah. And I don't know if I've been ever more vulnerable than those moments when I've been in the most pain.
Right.
And I think too, like, one of the things that the pain, quote unquote, the pain teacher has taught me has to have a tremendous amount of empathy for others that are in pain. So I can very much relate to other athletes that have been in, whether it's an injured or, mental, emotional pain, they're going through a relationship challenge, whatever it is, and how everything's interconnected. So for me, it's the pain has always, in whatever injury or whatever's happened, it's always been the stem of a new level of awareness. And, one of the things I was just thinking right now, like one of the things that I was amazed with the athletes in Boise was we had even young athletes. Like Ivan's son's 9 years old. He's a national champion. And, growing up, I did gymnastics, which was a fantastic, fantastic base for me. From an awareness, from learning courage, from skills, movement, etc. But honestly, I really feel like I missed out as a kid not having done growing up in the early ages martial arts. Because like what I saw from these kids, the amount of adversity and pain and like quote unquote physical pain and getting out of their comfort zone, like it was a rite of passage.
Yeah.
They were injured, but I was just like, I was in the gym almost 4 times a day. I'd participate in the strength and conditioning session in the morning. I'd work 2 workouts in the afternoon. Now, this was a much, much higher load than I normally train at, but I was trying to get the most out of the experience. And in the evening, I would either participate or just sit down and observe wrestling practice. And I was just blown away at the courage. Some kids, it was just an amazing experience. And I said to myself, the level of maturity that these kids and how much faster they're going to, quote unquote, get there. The maturity of a 9-year-old might as well have been a 15, 16, 17-year-old in normal society because he went through these, quote unquote, pain teachers, this rite of passage. And I was just like, wow, I really was just in awe. And I don't think I would have had, and I've been around martial artists and stuff, but I've never been around this type of environment. And to see what these guys went through, I was like, this is beautiful. This is just what these guys, the men that these guys are going to create, and also, how to also be soft in these situations.
Yeah, yes.
So, some guys would cry off the mat, but they'd have the teammates go talk to them and calm them down and tell them it's okay. And just like, I was so just amazed at the level of bonding and respect and what this environment created. So, the maturity that these kind of rites of passage can create, but as well as this new level of awareness that these pain moments or pain teachers can create, I really feel are some of the biggest blessings that we get in sport.
Yeah, and even though we're theming this mainly based on sport, we can translate directly into society and how for me and like yourself, as you just said, when I teach a lot of the HLC internships, and I remember one of the times I was teaching and a guy was on there and he was talking through some deep stuff and he was crying, and I kind of stopped the class and I said, seriously guys, that is good, because in society today men are frowned upon for crying. And I remember Deepak Chopra when Tony Robbins said to him, "Can you explain how you become invincible?" And he said, "The best way to become invincible is to become vulnerable, you know." And when she said, if you become vulnerable, you become invincible because you let go of everything. So what can hurt you? And as we know, there's so many men out there that they lack any form of self-growth. So they try to, you know, and they try to kind of focus on what they lack in internal growth by physical exercise, by, you know, putting on muscle, putting on size, and, you know, all this sort of stuff. And it's like, you know, they're armoring themselves up because of what they lack in their own soul growth. So, you know, a personal development through the pain teacher is necessary to force people into a stage of maturity.
Yes, I love that, 100%.
Yeah,
100%.
and I just think that's so important. So even though, you know, for the guys that listen, even though what we're talking about is sport is really life, because you know people will watch sport, they'll participate in sport for their own personal, you know, fitness. It doesn't have to be just competition based, but, you know, everything translates. And, you know, one of the things I always say to people is everyone in the world should be interested in the Four Doctors. Whether or not you're going to be living it as a coach makes no difference, but not everybody has to be invested in accountancy, because there's always someone that can do that, but every person on the planet should be doing the Four Doctors. So this sort of stuff is important to everyone in general. So I kind of wanted now to kind of shift gears and talk more about Mike as the coach now. What kind of, through all the experiences you've gained from Paul, from your own training with the, you know, Russian kettlebells, from traveling all around the world and learning from all these masters, how do things kind of fit with you? How do you train people that kind of allows you to kind of work at the elite level? Because I know for me, you know, there aren't, and I'm going to preface this by saying I've worked with a lot of elite athletes, footballers, and, you know, they've had chiropractors and physios at big clubs, like big football teams, and, you know, multi-million pound football teams. But the staff that they have are just out of the academy like 1-2 years. So you immediately assume, but it's Manchester United or whatever big club. So they've got to have the best of the best. But they're doing the same crap that everybody else is doing. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of these athletes are breaking down, because, you know, they're all doing the same thing. So I think it's really good to kind of find out, because like I said, you're in the top 1% in the world. What are the things that you're doing that is so different? You know, so it's a bit, you know, how you integrate the Eldoa stuff, the corrective exercise, the holistic stuff, the kettlebell stuff, and then whatever other things you kind of integrate from all of your own learning. How would you kind of coach people, and how does that work?
Yeah, I think, you know, it depends what someone's coming to me for, or what they think they're coming to me for, because usually that's going to be, for me, the door that's most open. So, like, I can't even tell you how many times, you know, people have come to me for Eldoas, and that's been the window that I've used to sprinkle the Four Doctors. And vice versa. You know, it's the way I pretty much work now is, you said it perfectly. It's like what the biggest sports teams, the biggest athletes, it's not easy by any means, but usually it's the most basic things that they're not doing that are preventing them from reaching their highest level. And so the first, like, I always start is Four Doctors, because no matter what they're doing, what strength and conditioning program they're doing, what stretches they're doing, whatever it is, if they're not sleeping, if they're not managing themselves, it's like, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it's like the results that they could be achieving, or at least the speed at which they get to their dream or their goal or whatever they're trying to work through, could be so much faster. So usually, depending on what the door is that's most open, that's what I work on, because I do feel that developing trust is a process, and it's one of the most important things to develop over time with people. And then also compliance, because we could have the greatest program in the world, you know, whether it's strength and conditioning, Eldoa, Four Doctors, but if they're not motivated to do it and they don't trust you as a coach, then it really doesn't matter, because we're here for them, not for us. And so for me, I kind of just pick, I'm usually brought into, let's say, a camp or something like that, depending on what's needed. A lot of times, like in one of the last camps I was in, they had a strength and conditioning coach, they had a nutrition guy, and so I said, fine, that's no problem. I'll just be your quote unquote durability coach. So I gave some HLC stuff, some four doctor stuff, LDOA stuff, and it was great. Got this guy through the fight. He was like, wow, now I know he's going to work with me for the next few years. So I kind of I try and just plant seeds, but as much as possible, I'll always at least point the seeds in terms of getting someone on the four doctors to start with, or at least whatever they're most open to. I start there. And then I kind of branch out there, and it's got to be a very individualized approach, but also a team approach, because even to be honest, I definitely do assessments, for example, but there's people far better than me. For example, Johnny Suarez is the guy he's really the one who said, he was the one quarterbacking my whole health and healing journey when I saw those 9 practitioners. So he was kind of the quarterback saying, okay, we've assessed you, try Rolfing, try this. And then after we exhausted everything, he goes, you know what, this is out of my scope, this is out of these guys' scope, I think it's time you go see Paul. And, if it's a case that's beyond me, it's or if even someone doesn't have the money to work with me, but I think that they need to see an upper cervical, or someone is knowledgeable, like a check level 3 or check level 4, get assessed, the most important thing is the client. So I'll always say, go see Johnny. And then Johnny, through a team approach, will create a badass program for you. So now my style is very much health is the foundation for high performance. Always start there. Work through the door, the window that's most open. And then develop a team approach that's really focused around the individual. And not so much about me or making me look good. Because as long as I'm supporting them in their dream, then that's the most important thing. Because their goals and their dream and their health and happiness is above all, what we're here to do as coaches. So that's kind of I'd say a brief little scope, but that's really how I work with people.
Do you work? Is it? Oh, I know. I mean, I'm asking you questions. I know the answer to this already, but obviously I got to throw it out there. How you work with people is obviously dependent on the person and the issue. Do you ever work on Skype with people, or is it always in person because you want to do all the physical stuff with them?
At this point in kind of my career and what I'm doing right now, I've got a few one-on-ones, but I've really scaled that back. I only keep a select 3 to 5 top athlete clients who are on board with the system, who will do all the work, and that just allows me to practice at a deeper level. So I can really practice the whole scope. But I would say that's a very small percentage right now. I don't do much on Skype, a little bit, but most everything is now just trying to travel, teach workshops, teach certifications, get the word out, kettlebells, Bulgarian bags, holistic lifestyle and nutrition. But really right now I'm just traveling, spreading the word. As I've been working on an online kettlebell program for almost 6 months, and I'm kind of at the tail end of it. So in the next few months, I'm so excited to release that, because I think, even though the online medium is not perfect, there's nothing that substitutes for a one-on-one and in person, but in terms of reach and just starting to kind of sprinkle these things out there, I'm really excited to kind of reach and touch more people. So that's kind of more or less how I'm operating right now.
So I want to kind of get back to that in a little bit, the online and the stuff that you're doing in the future. Obviously, coming to the UK and stuff. So we'll talk about that in a bit. Just because we're talking about the exercise stuff and how you work with people, what's your? Because I really want to get people to know your perspective on, on elitism in the functional way. What's your? Because we spoke off air when I was talking about your interview with Mind Pump, and you were just talking about a lot of your stuff with regards to how you get people to implement specific types of rest to improve their creativity, but also performance. So, what's your theory on rest and performance, and how do you kind of how do you get people to kind of do more, spiritual, sort of restful, stretchy type of exercises whilst they're so focused on performance? Because I know for me, a lot of these people think, well, if we're wasting 20 minutes, because they say it's waste. If you're wasting 20 minutes doing all this fluffy stuff, that could have been 20 minutes doing all this lifting stuff. So how do you kind of cross that bridge? How do you get them into the spiritual component of active rest or that sort of stuff?
I think, well, one of the things that's coming up for me right now, the most important thing is just living it myself. because I feel like leadership of that, if you live it, you look vital, you look healthy, you're performing. Like and that's one of the reasons why attracted me to Paul, is because he's a living, breathing example of what he teaches. So there's that initial, whether it's conscious or subconscious, if you're vibrant, healthy, happy, and like coming in with a smile, people want to do that. So I think the first thing, because you could put someone on, one of the things I'll share is the working in, which has been a great strategy for me. But you could put someone on the best working in program, but if you're not doing, like, there's gonna be, if you're not doing it or you don't fully buy into it, like, that's gonna come through to the person. So I'd say the first thing is living it and eating it. And then the second thing is, especially with the athletes, is getting them to do these things when they don't think they're doing it. Working in, at least in my experience, has been one of the most beneficial personally, but also professionally, ways to add in these self-reflective, healing modalities, spiritual connections, even when, you don't even have to tell someone about, you're going to grow spiritually by doing, it's like, don't even say that. Just let it happen and let them build the reps, let them build the repetition. And so for me, working in, taking even very familiar exercises, whether it's a kettlebell movement or something where we stay within the working in parameters, which is, you're very familiar, the heart rate can't elevate, you can't sweat, you should be able to do it on a full stomach, your tongue should stay moist. So provided I give them some constraints, or give them a little window, because they need some quote unquote rules or some guidelines. I say within this, play, get creative. There's a time to compete, but then we got to balance that out. So one of the ways is during the rest periods, even just getting them to do, maybe if they're open to it, a stork walk outside. If we're training outside, I love the portable tools, because I can get some, whether it's kettlebells, Bulgarian bags, I can get them outside. We can train at the park. I can get them out of the gym, get them bare feet. And then I can just, even if it's just a slow walk on the grass for a rest period, that's good enough for me. Like, I'm so happy if they do that every set. I was training Ben Greenfield a few months ago, and we were training like hard. I was taking him through a kettlebell workout, and it was his first experience, at least to my knowledge, doing work and exercises during rest periods. And he was really impressed. I said, but it started with me leading it. Like, if I didn't, but like, I was like, no, this is what I do. You want to know what I do? This is what I do. So it's up to you if you want to hop in or not. But and he was open to it. We just did breathing squats. So a squat movement, very familiar exercise, not threatening at all. And let's see how quickly you can make it a game, even how quickly you can get your heart rate down, your breath down. You're doing an intense set. I'm very proud of you for doing that. It's amazing, amazing feat. But now I want to see how quickly you can recover. Because if you can only do it once, then that's so good. But I want to see, can you do it 10 times with the same quality? Because when you look at a great lifter and a great athlete, one of the things that's always amazed me is, the great lifter from rep 100 will look identical technique-wise to rep number 1. And if you can, not break down the system, and working in can be a great way, can be a great transition to incorporate working in or self-healing practices, working on our breath, calming things down, but also through movement, which especially through athletes and especially through society today, that's a very familiar and a non-threatening way. So once again, like that door that's most open, it's been one of the most valuable things. It was my transition as an athlete to meditation, to even just sitting meditation or laying meditation. I wasn't ready for that for a long time. And so I'd say, oh, forget this stuff. Like, I'm just not ready for it. But it wasn't, I just didn't have the right thing that fit my lifestyle or my style, my personality yet. And now I can do it no problem. I can sit down quietly for 20 or 30 minutes. But it started with the movement. So incorporating work-ins during rest periods, and then also allowing them to enjoy that. Really, this is for me, the working in is the period of celebration. Just like a meal following training, it's like, this is the celebration. We celebrate, we get to feel, after you have a hard training session, your hands, like a deadlift, your hands vibrate, right? The nervous system. And you breathe deeper than you've ever breathed. And it's like, those moments are when I feel most alive and when I feel just the best. So working in as its own modality, but also interspersed within rest periods have been one of the most valuable things I've incorporated.
I love what you explained just now because it kind of gave me an image again. Um, when you talk about repetitions, and I love what you just said, where you said the first rep should look exactly the same as the 100th rep, and that for me, that's so powerful. Like I said to you off camera, these listeners are going to be like, how much stuff did you guys say off camera? God damn it! Yeah, we had a good chat off camera. It's like that was yummy. We should have recorded that.
It's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, exactly. We'll put that one on soon. But something, I love what you said, because it's like have myself working with elite athletes. One of the things that makes people get injured is their technique breaks down. People typically don't get injured like for football. They don't typically get injured at the start of a match. They typically get more injured in the second half or the end of the match when they're starting to fatigue, and then their motor pattern pathways become ruined because they're not able to maintain the same level of skill from start to end. And like you said, when you look at the people that are the best, especially in lifting or anything, the technique looks exactly the same. They may be tired, but the technique just is so well trained. The fact that they're able to be resting in activity is what allows them to continue. So it's almost like, I always give people the example of ballet. And I'm like, do you really think that guy throwing that girl up in the air, do you really think he finds that easy? No, he just makes it look easy because of the training and the ability to relax and just look like it's not hard. And I think what you just said about the work in stuff and allowing that to allow the person to maintain the same level of skill from start to end is so important. I mean, I don't know if people really understand how important that is, because people don't. I always say this: people don't get injured sitting at home watching TV. They don't get fit, but they don't get, unless the roof falls down on them or something. They get injured moving. So if the first rep and the last rep are the same, it's less likely that they get injured. And I think that is such a key point for the elite athlete to understand. So this working component, as you've explained, is so invaluable to eliminating injury through work, or through monotony or repetition. I think that is key. So I kind of wanted to just move on to talk about what you had just talked about, like where you're going with your business. Like you spoke about the online stuff, and then also want you to touch on the courses that you're putting out, the Chek inspired kettlebell course that you kind of started with Paul. So let's start on that one first. How did you get into setting up? And obviously you and Paul had modified your techniques and stuff, but how did you get into it, and how was it for you teaching that very first kettlebell course that you taught?
Oh, it was great. It was great. It's, pretty much, in the kettlebell quote unquote world, like there tends to be, and I think in any modality anywhere, there tends to be a lot of dogmatic teachings. And what I've really learned as an athlete, as a coach, is that they're very, it's never been my experience. There is no one way to the top, because what is the top anyway? But there is no one way to the top. And so when I teach, one of the things that I really enjoy is being able to offer different perspectives and telling people honestly, like, if you use this style, this is what it's good for, this is what it's conducive for, but these are the detractors for it, or this is what it's going to set you up for. This style or this technique is good for this. So if that's your dream, you got to do that, but you got to know how to balance the body with all these other things. So it was the Chek, the Chek course that I taught was such, is a culmination of my life's work as an athlete. Because, I've been exposed to so many different techniques, styles, coaches, training methodologies in the kettlebell world, that it was like, my first way to kind of, synthesize them all, but also present like what makes sense for me when someone's first learning. And then also I had a 4-doctor lecture in that course, which it's the only course that I know, kettlebells, that have talked 4-doctor. And it was only an hour maybe, but, that's exactly, and it was speaking off of, honestly, my own personal experience with it, because, going back to what you were sharing earlier about repetitions, like there's plenty of coaches far smarter than me, have far more accolades and everything like that from degrees and such. But the one thing that I have excelled at is just experience and just living this stuff. And like, I would much rather, for me personally, work with a coach that is not maybe as intelligent intellectually, but has been working and living this stuff and training. And because that's the priceless part, because anyone can go read a book, but unless you've actually gotten into a clinch or gotten up close with a wrestler, unless you've experienced what they feel and you've put in the thousands of reps in one style, like you could see something on YouTube and be like very judgmental, like, oh, that's that. It's like, dude, but you can't even come close to fathoming the depth at what that technique is good for or not good for unless you've done it yourself and done thousands of repetitions. So the Chek course, and also the one that, so right now we are planning on the weekend of October 13th and 14th for me to come to Chek Europe and at least do one day of a kettlebell workshop and possibly one day of a Bulgarian bag. It will very much be depending on the time, and really, I've got my plan for what I'd like to teach, but depending on what the students, the level of them, and what they're most interested in learning, I always have a structure when I teach, but I've learned to be more flexible in terms of who's there in front of me, because, I could plan to teach to advanced level practitioners, but if someone still is missing the fundamentals or wherever we got to go with it, so I'm also very flexible in that respect too. So the Chek course for me was such a joy because it was a culmination of my life's work of, incorporating a system of systems in kettlebells via for doctors, but also from a technique standpoint, and just being able to speak and being able to show people, like, if someone's curious, hey, I want to learn, that sports style, and I'll just tell them honestly, that's not right for you, at least not right for you right now, and not right for you until you lay down all these things first. But, I can show them it, I can show them and just let them give them that experience. So yeah, it was such a joy, and it was almost 2+ years creating that course, and it's constantly been evolving.
And how long is that course?
What's that?
How long is that course? How many days?
That one was 2 days that I did for the Chek Institute.
Yeah.
And the one that I'll teach in the UK should be probably just a 1 day, I believe, workshop. But we're still figuring out the details right now.
Right. And then you spoke about this new online kettlebell course. Can you share some of that info?
Yeah, so that is the project I'm most excited with right now. I would say it's more geared towards fitness professionals and coaches. The people who gravitate towards the Chek kind of mindset will really appreciate it, because granted, athletes can watch it, it's great, but the level of detail and depth is just not for everyone. It's like, I really just want to give to those people who really want to learn progressions, regressions, who just don't, like, I'm not the person who's going to kick your butt. Like, I'm the person, like, I love teaching. I love being the technical coach and helping coaches develop their eyes. And then with that, which is what takes the most time, and if you have some program design principles, then you can create a badass workout or a badass training program. But it's mainly around, I would say, geared towards fitness professionals, and especially the Chek professionals. I would say more so than not, just because Chek professionals, in my experience being one myself, are people who are so in love with what they do and really, really want to learn. Like, when I taught that Chek workshop for 2 days, it was one of the most enjoyable times I had teaching, because they just really wanted to learn, and they were there to learn, and it was just a great experience. So it'll be a foundational program around mastering the basics of kettlebell lifting. But when I say mastering the basics, as what makes the very best in any sport or anything in life is mastering those things and really loving the details. So I say basics, but even now I'm still drilling the basics myself, and I say that with all honesty. So it's for fitness professionals mastering the basics, and it'll all be kettlebell focused.
Cool. And how, with the online course, is it a thing where you have certain stages of it? Is it like a 5-month program? How does it work online? Is it just a thing where people can view any part of it at any time to learn a specific lifting technique?
So right now we're just implementing everything into the platform, and so what it's looking like, and there's going to be multiple programs, but at least this most foundational one, I'll package it in a few different packages. Like, for example, deadlifts, swings, cleans, snatches, which is kind of the developmental progression for those. And then like an overhead, which would be like presses, push presses, jerks, Turkish get-ups, windmills. And then like a third section of like squatting, lunging, horizontal pulling. They could purchase the full program, but also if they want to work in shorts. Right. And then once they go through this, like this has been such a such an undertaking because, everyone's told me, oh, you should do a sexy program like kettlebell flows and all this stuff. And maybe at some point, and I will do these more smaller, very focused programs, but I've told them every time, it's like, if you can't do a clean, if you don't know how to insert your hand in the bell without banging, if you don't know common errors and fixes for these movements, if you don't have some form of a movement check as basic as it is before you start, it's like, I'm not doing you any good as a coach. But after this program, I will certainly do like, kettlebell flows and advanced techniques and all sorts of kind of more solid or smaller programs. But this will be a large program if someone wants the full scope. But I know when they go through it as a coach and as a lifter, then my goal, hopefully someone wants to stick with me during their kettlebell journey. But if not, that's cool too. My goal is anyone who takes the program, no matter what program or even certification they do with kettlebells, even if it's not with me, whatever it is, that I've set them up for success and that they can hop into a group training class that uses kettlebells and they can lift and have more knowledge than even the instructor. Then I've done my job. So, yeah.
Do you know what? I mean, so obviously it's aimed more for coaching, for people that want to coach as well. And I wanted to say something on this. Something that, kind of annoys me that people don't get this is that, this understanding of mastery and what mastery really takes. And, I remember when you speak to certain martial artists, they'll say, or even boxing coaches, like they sometimes have a boxer who's been fighting for 10 years and they take them on the pads and say, you can't even jab properly. And they say, right, for the next 6 months, we're not going to do any punch except the jab. And the guy's like, the jab's such a basic punch. And he goes, yeah, and you haven't even mastered that yet. So, if you want to get into mastery, to be able to master like one thing could take you so long. But for me, it's like being able to master those foundations that you're talking about. It's not even just kettlebell. It translates into everything because, like for me, for martial arts, having quite a high skill set over the years in martial arts, that allowed me to allow that to translate into every single movement in life, because the mechanics of kettlebell lifting is the mechanics of life in general. So by them coming and doing like a kettlebell training program, it's not just kettlebells they're mastering. They're mastering movement, and movement translates to anything, because it's like, what's his name, Michael Jordan. All right, he wasn't the best baseball player in the world, but he translated to baseball professionally very quickly. It's like, if you're good, you're good. If you can move, you can move. And so I think, having something like that, because that's not my kettlebells isn't my forte, but to have something like that online where people can master, you can master the basics in golf, you'll be able to master something else anyway, so it translates into everything. I think that's the beauty of kind of having something like that, because it translates into everything else. So just before we kind of close, what is, because you mentioned, what you'd accomplished at 19, but I know you've got some other records. Recently you're one of few people. Are you like the only American that has gotten to a certain level in kettlebell lifting? Is like the 36, or you tell me, I don't want to mess it up.
Yeah. So in 2017, I won the World Championships in long cycle, and then I'm one of only, I think it's 5 or 4 Americans who's been able to achieve that one of the highest ranked master of sport in both clean and jerk, as well as biathlon, which is 10 minutes unbroken of jerks plus 10 minutes unbroken of snatches. Right. So it's 20 minutes total lifting. You split it up by a few hours during the day. Jeez. So I'm one of the few guys, just I think maybe 4 or 5 of us, who have achieved that. And then I'm close. I'm 2 reps away from being the first North American to ever hit master of sport with the 40 kilos. So I've been 2 reps. I've come close 2 reps on 3 competitions.
Wow! So oh my gosh!
More to get after on that.
Actually, we haven't touched. That is absolutely amazing. So even though I'm like bigging up for all those that are listening, I'm not getting any kickbacks here on any of this stuff. But I just know mastery when I see it, and I just think it's important. So I know most of this talk we were speaking a lot about your background, but I want to do a lot more talks where we get more into other things, more educational things. But I thought it was really important to kind of preface, your background and how you work with people in your foundation, so people actually understand the type of person that they're actually listening to right now. So one last thing actually before we wrap up, Bulgarian bags. I've been seeing some of your videos on Instagram, and I was like, oh my gosh, these look so functional. I mean, to me, one of the most, I mean, other than the Swiss ball, which you can just do thousands of exercises on, and if you couldn't afford a gym, just buy a Swiss ball, you have enough to play around for years, especially if you've got a smart mind. But other than that, and the tornado ball, I've never, honestly, and I'm not saying this because I'm in front of you, I've never ever seen something as functional as tornado ball and Swiss ball. I didn't think there was anything else on the market that could be like that until I saw you dropping this stuff with the Bulgarian bag. I have seen Bulgarian bags before, but I've just seen people just carry it on their shoulder and run. Nothing like what I've seen you do, rotational, centrifugal, I'll make up some other words soon, stuff. Tell me about this Bulgarian bag, and did you do any training? Did you kind of develop some of these techniques yourself?
The Bulgarian bag, honestly, is the kettlebell for sure is one of my favorite pieces. But the Bulgarian bag was developed by Coach Ivan. So the reason the Bulgarian bag was developed was so that he had a tool that he could take on the mats and train his wrestlers at the elite level. So every single movement that you do with the Bulgarian bag, I mean, it's great for fitness. I mean, it's phenomenal for fitness, but it was designed to train Olympians. And essentially what it does, very much like kettlebells, but in their own way, different tool, it makes amazing movers. Amazing. Like, you can train, I mean, from grip, rotational strength, rotational power, coordination, combination movements. The Bulgarian bag, it's still in its very infancy stage. I've been using the bag for almost 10 years, but I would say only in the last 3 years. Yeah, I'm one of the first ones that looks totally different than they have now. But I was using it for the vast majority of the time. I was using it as like a barbell, lunging with it. I didn't know until I took a level 1 certification the potential of what you can do with this thing. And then fast forward to level 2, and then now that's why I flew to spend 3 weeks in Boise. But the Bulgarian bag is only one of 5, I don't even say training tools, training systems that Ivan's developed. There's 2 full-blown complete levels of Bulgarian bag education that he's developed. There's 1 level currently of the ball, which you may have seen, the soupless ball.
Yeah.
So that would kind of be, like fighters love that, because the analogy would almost kind of like be mitts, like very speed endurance, very good for coordination, transition, amazing for cardiovascular conditioning. The grips aren't nearly as hard as the Bulgarian bag because you have handles. The Bulgarian bag is going to really gas your forearms, but from like a combination, different ranges of motion, changing levels. So the ball is much more a cardio and a speed and coordination tool, full-blown education system on that. Then he's also got 3 other full-blown systems that I barely knew about, and it blew my mind. One is called the Hertz System, which is the bands that you may have seen me do
I've seen it around under your body. Yeah, that was crazy.
I'm barely scratching the surface on those. They can be used as a warm-up tool, a cool-down tool, a strength and power tool, you name it. And there's full-blown, there could be 2 easily full-blown days just on the bands. Then he's got a whole system around dummies, so all types of throw dummies. Then he's got something called a gladiator wall. So the Bulgarian bag is really where we're starting, really trying to build the soupless education. And so that's the certifications that I'm teaching. And I always tell people, it's like, people are skeptical at first because it's a new tool. It's kind of like where kettlebells were 20 years ago. 20 years ago, plus years ago, when Pavel brought kettlebells to the United States, people were like, what is this? It's strange. I don't understand it. But now, still people don't know how to use it to a large extent. But every gym, every spa, everything is sold on the idea of why they're functional and why their members want it. I truly, truly believe that in the next 10 years, maybe sooner, the Bulgarian bag will be as big, if not bigger, than the kettlebell. It is such in its infancy stage, and I always say all I need to do is just get it in someone's hand. And someone like you especially, which hopefully when I come to Europe we can do some fun training together. As soon as you put it in your hand, I don't even have to say anything. I could show you a few basic movements. You're intelligent enough, and you'll just feel it. And it's been the easiest thing to sell because I don't even have to sell it. I believe in it. People have their own authentic experience with it. As soon as people touch it, the movements, the combination, the flows, it feels amazing. So the Bulgarian bag and all the tools are really fantastic and fun. Most importantly, they're fun.
Yeah. So I definitely want to, when we have our part two, like how Paul's having his part two with Aubrey Marcus and other people, we'll have our part two, the return of Mike Salemi. See, I'm gonna go mess up your name. It's in my head now. So I'm gonna say it again.
Salemi.
Salemi, right? Yeah. When you come up, yeah, we definitely have to have a part two where we talk about in more depth about how you integrate these bags into work with your clients, especially the martial art guys and stuff. So yeah, that's kind of it for me. I kind of want to just get people into this sort of stuff, but I'm really excited to kind of talk more about those tools that you spoke about, and then also next time talk more about spirituality in your own life and how that can be implemented in other people's practices and stuff. So very grateful for you sharing your time with me. And yeah, before we go, where can people find you?
So the best place on Instagram is mike.salemi. I'm probably most active on Instagram, but also my website is mikesalemi.io, not .com, .io. Right. And then I just started a Facebook business page, and it's just Mike Salemi's page. And so I'll be updating that more. And but honestly, Warren, thank you so much for having me. This has been a pleasure. I've been wanting to connect with you for a while, and I know we exchanged some comments on social media. So honestly, from my heart, man, thank you so much for having me.
And just before I'm so blessed and thankful as well, but just before we end, can you spell your surname for those that are actually searching for you?
Yes, Salemi, S-A-L-E-M-I.
Cool. All right, guys. Peace and love. Until next time.